Hi, my name's Jim Hall. I'm sorry that we're not able to do this constant conference face-to-face for obvious reasons, but it's a great pleasure to be with you to talk about water resources in a changing climate. Let me just start sharing my screen, if such a thing is possible. Here we are. So the title I've chosen for this talk refers to a speech given by Sir James Bevan, Chief Executive of the Environment Agency, who referred to the jaws of death, the notion that England could face water shortages within the next 25 years. And the idea that Sir James was trying to get across derived from pictures like this, where one has at the upper jaw projections of availability of water, and in the lower set of lines projections of demand for water. And what we're seeing is, depending on which scenario you're in, those two lines cross over at some point in the future. This picture came from some work which my group did more than a decade ago. So I'm guilty of using the jaws as well. But what I'm going to go on to say is that actually the jaws are potentially quite a misleading type of concept if we're understanding climate change. One thing that's already clear from this picture is that there are multiple scenarios. So we don't actually know when these two lines might cross in the future. And actually things are more uncertain than that because of the way in which water shortages actually materialize, which is through prolonged dry periods. And what's going on with that? Well, if we look at precipitation over the last couple of hundred years, then actually we don't see much of a trend at all, particularly in the drier summer season, the red line. Maybe there's an upward tick if you squint at the lower line. And in terms of rainfall deficits, the lower panel, we don't see much of a trend in that either. What we do see a clear trend in is evaporation and this metric called aridity. So because of increasing temperatures from climate change, we know that evaporation or evapotranspiration is going up. And that's going to get more severe in the future because of climate change. Going back to what models tell us about precipitation in future, actually there's a pretty big range, though the overall story of wetter winters and drier summers, which came through in the CP09 scenarios, is very much reproduced in the later CP18 scenarios. And what we do know, in particular, because there's upward driver on evaporation, evapotranspiration, is that if you simulate lots of future climates, as Benoit Guillaude and colleagues in Oxford did as part of the Marius project, you can foresee some really severe possible droughts in the future. And these are the top 10 most severe droughts that Benoit simulated under climate change. And these are the sorts of things we need to be looking at in order to ensure the resilience of water supplies going into the future. That's the upper jaw of the jaws of death. On the lower jaw is driven for the most part by population increases. Those are quite uncertain, both what will happen in the future, the upper graph, and where population increases might take place. Though on the whole, in these scenarios developed within the ITRC consortium that I lead, most of that growth in most scenarios is projected to be in the south and east in the country, where there is less water anyway. Trends in water consumption. This is data from the Adaptation Committee. Is on the way down, but only gently so. And in the Water UK study in 2016, they looked at much more aggressive scenarios for per capita consumption reductions over this century in order to have an impact on the potential for water scarcity. Leakage is another side of getting that water usage down, and there's clearly more to be done there, as the Adaptation Committee has said. And the Water UK study also looked at some very ambitious scenarios with respect to leakage reduction, ambitious but possible. And then the other part of the water supply balance calculation we need to look at is how much water is needed for the environment. The picture on the right here, the red catchments are ones which are considered to be over abstracted, so there's not enough water in the environment. And the Environment Agency has been working on this for a long time in terms of reducing abstraction licenses, but there are possibilities of even more reductions in water withdrawals in future in order to restore the environment. That may be necessary to make the environment more resilient to the possible climate-related shocks that hold in future. So water companies need to be planning for these scenarios of further license reductions in the future. So back to the jaws. We've understood that it's a bit more complicated than just a line of supply and a line of demand crossing each other. I think we should be thinking about the supply side is very variable and unpredictable. So the upper jaws of this crocodile are very pointy, and they're unpredictable where those big dips in supply might be because of droughts. And then the lower jaw, the demand side, is adjustable. We can and we must be adapting in terms of how much water is used in the future and how much we leave in the environment. So that leads to this notion of adaptive pathways, where the upper panel here, you might think of, again, of being the upper jaw. There's very unpredictable set of possible droughts going into the future. This is River Thames summer flow. This was some work which Ashley Kingsborough did for London and the Thames. The lower jaw, this is the population driver going up, certainly becoming uncertain, maybe flattening off in the future. And then a series of adaptive interventions, efficiency technologies, leakage reduction, metering, pricing, and then possibly at some point in the future where the risk is going up, some large supply side intervention is needed, which takes the risk down, but there is still this upward driver, primarily coming from demand, to some extent coming from climate, and so further action might be needed in the future. So I think rather than thinking about the jaws, we need to be thinking about these changing risk profiles going through into the future, the risk becomes more uncertain, and what happens to risk depends on what we do on the supply side and the demand side. And the water companies are taking this on board. This is from, I think, a rather nice illustration from the Thames Water Water Resource Management Plan, where they illustrated quite nicely also that there are multiple goals and there are trade-offs between those goals. And they looked at a range of different options, how they did with respect to cost, environmental impact, coping with future challenges like climate change, and so settled on what they considered to be the most sustainable options. This is all part of a really significant set of changes in the policy landscape. In 2014, the Water Act brought in a duty of resilience. The climate change risk assessment has been highlighting the impact of climate and socioeconomic change for water supplies. In 2016, Water UK took the first national look at water resources resilience for a long time, and began to understand the big picture of water resilience. The government's 25-year plan for the environment also recognized the importance of resilience of water supplies and restoring the aquatic environment. The National Infrastructure Commission looked at this and considered that there needed to be more strategic infrastructure on the supply side as well as action on the demand side. And the Environment Agency has taken up the baton with their national framework for water resources, which again took a national picture, but then emphasized the importance of regional groups and water companies working within those groups. And then the regulators of water, Environment Agency, Ofwat, Drinking Water Inspectorate, have created the Regulators Alliance for Progressing Infrastructure Development, RAPID, which is now developing more capability to look at those strategic schemes. And I have to say that a lot of progress has been made in the water sector. So these concepts of dynamic adaptive planning, which I mentioned briefly, have been widely accepted. Companies are upping their game in terms of their capacity to stress test future conditions, and do analysis of the performance of their systems before, during, and after droughts. This involves a lot of computation, and some time ago, water companies were saying this is far too complicated, but actually most of them are now taking this on board. Ofwat and RAPID are developing this national capability. My team is going to be doing this national simulation modeling for them with this model which is depicted on the right, and regional groups are really developing their capabilities as well. And the Water Resource Management Planning Guideline, which has just been put out for consultation, takes lots of these issues on board: the importance of risk, of stress testing, of adaptive planning, of reporting on metrics in terms of the frequency, duration, and severity of water shortages for people and the environment. So I think we're on a really significant journey with respect to the management of water resources. There's still more to do in this process of understanding and quantifying risks, so we can actually really say how big the risk of water shortages is in this country at national, regional, company, water resource zone scales. And that involves improving our methods. We've come a long way, but there's more to do in terms of really credibly assessing risks of prolonged and large-scale droughts. We need to do a lot better at understanding the resilience of the natural environment. The natural environment naturally copes with occasional droughts and shocks. and recovers. But we know that a stressed environment, a degraded environment, is much less able to cope. So we need to be restoring the environment, and then we can rely on it during times of extreme shock. That means more ambition on demand management, on leakage reduction, and it means timely action on the supply side, including these strategic schemes, including wastewater reuse, and other innovative options on the supply side in order to cope with an uncertain future. So, thanks for your attention. It's been great having this opportunity to speak to you very briefly, and I hope succinctly, with respect to what the future holds with respect to water supplies. And I'm looking forward to the discussion in the panel as part of this important conference.